Suddenly, everyone's been talking about something called quiet quitting. It became popular on social media, and it's just one way that workers from Generation Z are talking about work differently than earlier generations. With us to explore what this new group's arrival might signify for the workplace now and in the future, let's welcome from furthest from our studio to closest. In the nation's capital, Rob Carrick, personal finance columnist at the Global Mail. In Hamilton, Ontario, Nati Zamisa, Program Director at House Canada and Vice Chair of First Works Youth Council. In Oakville, Ontario, Linda Nazareth, Principal of Relentless Economics and Senior Fellow for Economics and Population Change at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. And in our studio, Scott Sheeman, Professor of Sociology and a Canada Research Chair in the Social Context of Health at the University of Toronto. Hi, everybody.
Hi there.
Morning.
Welcome.
So I guess we should probably start with, is it Generation Z or Generation Z? Scott, I'll start with you.
Well, I'm American, so I say Z. I'm sorry.
Okay, Linda, what about you? Generation Z or Generation Z?
I really just think it depends where you are. I tend to say Z, Canadian.
And Nati?
Proud to say Zed. Yeah.
And finally, Rob.
Hard Z for me.
Okay, I think
All right.
we win. Sorry, Scott. But we'll go. I know we normally, like, it's very popular. It's been popularized as Generation Z, but Z. But we're in Canada,
Okay,
so we're
I'll
going to
say
go
Z.
with Generation
I'm on
Z.
board.
So we're going to start the conversation by getting to know Generation Z. They were born between 1997 and 2012 and have the second fastest growing population of any generation in Canada. According to the 2021 census, Generation Z represents 17.6% of working age Canadians. They're more exposed to ethnocultural, religious, and gender diversity, and their values have been influenced by the interconnected technological world they grew up in. They are posed to become the most educated generation in Canadian history, just like millennials did before them. So we know a little bit about Generation Z. Rob and Linda, I want to start with you. You know, as baby boomers retire, Gen Zers are set to replace them in the job market. How do Generation Z's attitudes towards work differ from previous generations? Rob, I'll start with you.
Well, I think they are dramatically less committed to their jobs and to their careers than baby boomers are. But we have to remember that Gen Z are young and they are also entering the workforce in a time of great turmoil in the economy. So all these things mixed together, and it's somehow produced this attitude that I don't want to work 50-hour work weeks. I don't want to be all about my career. These are aspects of work that boomers took for granted, and they put it to good use. They've built great careers, and they have good incomes, and they've done well, and they're satisfied with that. Gen Z, not so much.
And Linda?
Yeah, it is really interesting. We talk about them being tech savvy, but I think it's easy to underestimate just how tech savvy they are. You know, they are doing videos on TikTok that are as sophisticated as ad agencies used to do. Now, they know they can do a lot of work without ever going to a conventional workplace. So they won't really be bought off by, you have to do this, you have to do that. They know it can be done a lot of different ways.
Well, Nati, you've heard both Rob and Linda on their thoughts on Gen Z. Many younger adults have taken to declaring that they don't have dream jobs and that generation, unquote, Gen Z doesn't dream of labor. In the words of Kim Kardashian, why does anyone not want to work anymore? Nati.
I wouldn't necessarily say that it's not that we don't want to work anymore, that we're not dreaming about labor, but we're dreaming about something different. And we're dreaming, our dreams are conditioned by changes and transformations in the world of work and the kinds of technologies that are available. And we're more so really thinking about how can we become, this commodity, or how are we the entrepreneur that's selling that? Our parents were born in the wake of an economic crisis. There were mortgage rates at double digits. Their parents adjusted by taking on non-standard work. When we had the 2007-2009 economic crisis, our parents adjusted by taking on non-standard work. And so the norm is to take on non-standard work. And that's what it is for our generation. And, our technology, our societies are transforming around that. And that's just what we know. And so our work is going to be different. It's going to be non-standard. We don't think about work the same way.
You don't think about the same way. I wanted to do a follow-up with you. Do you think that Gen Z is misunderstood?
I think absolutely. I think Gen Z, we're the first generation that has always been able to be contacted. Our phones are always with us, and our work is increasingly being put on our phones. whether it's like our human resources management systems, our asset management systems, they're always with us. And we're the first generation where that is the norm, the only kind of relationship with work that we have. And we're always able to be engaged by our employers and chased down by our work is always well. And we also learned with the pandemic that we can work anywhere and that we can do any work that we want to do anywhere, and that we're able to generate or at least command an income from a variety of income streams that aren't in the workplace, that aren't in the office, on a factory floor, in a mail delivery room. We can do it if we want to do it in an island in Tahiti. So it's different.
Scott, you've been listening to those responses so far. Do younger generations have a more transactional relationship with work?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think I feel like the pandemic has really introduced a lot of existential ambivalence. So there's a lot of contradictory kinds of statements about the way Gen Z feels about work and what they're committed to and what they're not committed to. My basic sense is the kind of takeaway right now is that Gen Z isn't that different from other generations, especially millennials. There's a slight tick up in certain things that they demand, they want. There's a lot of conversation about how they're bolder, they're less likely to stick with something that they don't like and move on. But I think overall, my sense is that, we put labels like Gen Z or millennial or Gen Z or X or baby boomers, that kind of thing. But in the end, people are human. And there are some cross-cutting factors that cross generations, like our drive for status, our interest in having a good life. And I think no matter what age you are, work provides anchor. Work provides a set of anchors and identity. And I think the pandemic shook that up. So I agree with the others. Mm-hmm. The pandemic shook that up. But I think ultimately that's what Gen Z will come back to.
You said that there's not much difference between Gen Z and millennials. And I know I'm not a millennial. Yeah. I'm the greatest generation ever, Gen X.
Hello.
No one else ever gives us the credit that is due, so I will give it to my generation.
Yeah.
But I know for millennials, I don't know if you've seen all the videos on TikTok or on Instagram. There's this kind of like battle between those two generations and how millennials will just suck it up and do what they're expected to do. Gen Z might send a tweet or even text message saying, I'm going away for the weekend. Yeah. So you said that it's just everyone is people, but there are different ways to approach because of the society that we live in, right?
I think, okay, so as a sociologist, I'm really interested in the sociology of hating work right now. It's since March 13th, Friday the 13th, 2020, I feel like every time I open my browser, I saw another story about work and how bad work is and how awful it is. I don't disagree that there are problems, but I think there are, some of these labels are somewhat arbitrary, right? Like they're, 25 and younger, but how different is a 25-year-old from a 28-year-old or a 29-year-old?
But we have census. They ask you, services are provided based on your age group.
For sure, but I think the question is about what do they value, what do they need, what do they prefer? And unless there's some kind of dramatic system shock, which was the pandemic for most people, I think that cuts across a lot of different groups. But I disagree with things like dramatic statements like they don't want to be in offices. For example, one story is they don't want to be in an office. The next story is they need to be in an office because they need mentoring and they need learning. So, my head spins with some of these studies. That being said, I don't disagree with the idea, though, that there's definitely a shift right now because of the pandemic. But I feel like that cuts across more work across the board for workers, somewhat differently depending on their age stage. But I think there are more commonalities than people want to see.
Well, you brought up a question that I want to ask to Natty. That was about what does Gen Z value? Natty, what does your generation value? Does your work need to reflect your identity, values, and political opinions?
I think to a certain degree, absolutely. But I also think that it's mostly that we're not committing entirely to working for somebody else, right? At the end of the day, work is so that we can command an income, so that we can continue to live, so that we can survive in today's society. And what is like potentially something that could be called like a permanent state of austerity, or crises that keep on coming closer and closer and closer together. That again, we are seeing in real time, and that we're reacting to. And so we're just trying to find work or a way of earning an income that accommodates all of those things. And those things require flexibility. They require something that's adjustable or adaptable to the changes in society. And that's what we're demanding. Something that isn't static, something that can't be fixed like our previous generations had, something that is really, really unique. And we're constantly reinventing these things.
And Rob, Scott mentioned with the different generations, I think some of these problems that were exposed during the pandemic have been around for a very long time. Like, how do you balance work with your home life? Can we work from home? And during the pandemic, we did find out, yeah, you can work from home. So, Rob, would you say that Generation Z is developing, I guess, like a bad reputation for how they behave in the workplace?
I think they are developing that reputation. Earned, I think not. But I got to tell you that every couple of years, a new generation emerges and society decides to look at all their faults. So the faults of Gen Z is that they don't want to work hard. I heard the same thing about millennials. They're flaky, they're too coddled. Now Gen Z is being badmouthed because they are not as committed as boomers are to their jobs, and they're not reliable employees. I think that's just the society's natural tendency to criticize young people and find some unique flaw in them. And I often think it's just a passing phase. These are young people. They're adapting in a time of great social turmoil, and I think they're gonna. I think that we flash ahead 10 years from now. A lot of them are going to be leading very conventional work lives.
And Rob, Linda, I want to come to you next because Rob brought something up. We've been doing work the same way for so long, and we have to ask ourselves why. If it's not working, let's try something different. And something that I mentioned during my intro was quiet quitting. Now this became popular on social media. Linda, can you explain to us what is quiet quitting?
Well, there's a couple of definitions of it now, but the one that seems to get in people's imagination is that you're going to work, you're doing what you need to do, but you're not going above and beyond. And to me, if that's happening in an organization, that's a problem of management. If you have somebody coming in, whether it's TVO or the Globe or anyone else, and they just want to do the absolute bare minimum, somebody hasn't gotten them excited about the larger purpose. Like, they only see something very narrow and they don't care about the bigger picture or the aim of the organization. So I think that's an issue right off the top. It may have become maybe a little bit overblown as a phenomenon. We know TikTok has really magnified this, and a couple of videos have gone viral, and it's caught the imagination. But it's not just younger people. I've seen older people tweet about this and talk about this and say, I've given enough, and I just want to do my work. And again, I think that's a problem overall. It means people are not engaged with their jobs, and a lot of organizations might want to think about why that is.
Natty, I see you nodding a lot.
Well, no, I really, really agree with what was said, but I also think it's important to remember, like, we have, at the same time that we have like a huge amount of wealth polarization in society, we also have labor shortages. And in a perfect market economy, you would just pay more for those jobs, and that addresses the wealth polarization, and then more people would go to those jobs, and then you have labor shortages. In terms of like our real buying power, it is not increasing vis-a-vis the cost of living. Like, I can't imagine owning a home, and I think many of my peers in my generation are in the same place. And that our minimum wage is indexed to inflation and not to the cost of living. And then again, with more and more non-standard work, with jobs that are in the gig economy or in the hustle economy or in like libidinal or pleasure-based economies, we don't have the same employment benefits that any of the previous generations had. We have the erosion of pensions, and so we don't have the same like long-term scope that I guess previous generations had. And then you also don't have the same access to the social welfare state that folks have. So if you're like an independent contractor, you don't necessarily have access to EI, for example, in the same way that folks have. So you're kind of really, really stuck to working. And if that is the case, then you're working a lot, and you're probably going to be burnt out. And so maybe this is more so a response to that burnout, in response to the changes in work, than it is folks saying, oh, I don't want to go above and beyond. They're constantly going above and beyond, but not for one workplace. They're doing it across different gigs. So.
Scott, Natty brought up so many good points because we've all read those articles of, I think we were dumping on millennials with these articles, like millennials are not buying homes because they're eating too much avocado toast. But I think for the boomer generation, there was a lot of benefits, right? Mm-hmm. You work X amount of years, you get a pension, you can afford a home. Now for Generation Z, it doesn't matter how many hours you work or how many, most of us are not even with companies that long anymore. Yeah. It's really hard to afford even just buying a house.
Yeah.
What part are we missing something in this conversation when we neglect to talk about the lack of benefits?
It's really interesting. I mean, something Rob said about how I think I heard him say that in 10 years from now, it'll probably revert back to more of a conventional, I think, kind of conventional work life. The one thing, I've been tracking the trends in the quality of work life in Canada and the US for decades now. And the one thing that stands out is how remarkably stable feeling underpaid is. That's one of the big, feeling underpaid, feeling like you don't make enough to make ends meet. It's worse in the US, but how remarkably stable that trend is. And I think to the point of whether younger generations will continue to tolerate that is an interesting question, right? Because I think some of the interest in social justice and the greater talk about values and equity and equality, that might translate into some changes on this. But there's definitely this element of feeling distributive justice, feeling underpaid is a chronic issue. That combined with staff shortages and overload, those are where you see the problems. But again, I don't see them as tied to one particular age cohort or group. You see this across the board. I've interviewed a lot of people in their 50s who are like, this isn't what I signed up for. And they look back on a career and they feel really jilted. So, and you know, the anger and the anxiety definitely gets our attention. And so that's why phrases like quiet quitting, and you know, now you have quiet firing, and I call it quiet BS. I think some of this stuff is just very exaggerated. The Gallup poll in the US that suggested half of Americans are quiet quitting seems so exaggerated to me. I'd love to dive deeper into that data because I don't buy it.
I want to come back to you with what. Can you quickly tell us what quiet firing is?
Quiet firing. Well, again, it's another term that somebody coined and have become famous for. So quiet firing is sort of when you, instead of actually firing somebody, loud firing, you actually give them fewer tasks, you give them less attention, you sort of quietly reduce their status or their significance in the workplace by giving them less, or treating them somewhat less included or involved. I think that's my sense of it. But again, it's sort of the employer strikes back with, okay, you're going to quiet quit, I'm going to quiet fire. But I think the point about staff shortage is a good one, because when there isn't a surplus of workers, workers have more power. But as soon as there's a recession or something, I mean, I think that's when you're going to see things swing back with employers having more power.
Rob, I want to come to you because we can laugh about quiet quitting, even just quiet firing. But in the end, I think when people get grouped into something like, oh, they're Gen Zers, they're going to quit, they're not as committed to their jobs, they don't value their jobs. If we hire them, we'll probably pay them less, or maybe not promote them because they'll just leave. In the end, does this affect the personal finances of those in Gen Z, Rob?
Well, I think quiet quitting, if it's a true thing, will affect them. You know, I work on a podcast for the Globe Mail. It's called Stress Test. It's a personal finance podcast for Gen Z and millennials. And you know what our number one topic is? Housing. Our housing episodes are by far our most listened to episodes. And the reason is that, while I know a lot of Gen Zers and millennials don't think they will own a house, they badly want to. And if they want to, they're going to need to excel in the workforce. They're going to need to find a path where they have a rising income. And I think that, this idea of sort of pulling back from the workforce isn't conducive to that. But on the other hand, I'll say that it's actually a very good time for young people in the workforce today. There's a very tight job market. They have way more leverage than millennials did. Millennials, after the 2008-09 financial crisis, were boxed into contract jobs. They were like going back to school. There has never been more leverage. So I think if you were to find a job that you were engaged with as a young person, now is the time to go out there, ask for benefits, ask for a good salary, ask for a signing bonus. There are things on the table that have not been and will not be once that recession that everyone's talking about hits.
Natty, I saw you smiling.
No, I'm really liking what I'm hearing, but I'm also understanding this is like, I wanted to go back to the question of quiet quitting because it's not a new phenomena. It's actually like a very, very old tactic, and it's just been like reframed in new terms. And, to the question of who's making up these terms, I also want to know. But it like, if you think about what quiet quitting fundamentally is, it is like working down to the T of your employment contract in a way that is like lawful, right? Like you can't be fired for not doing that. And historically in more unionized settings, we just call that work to rule because you're working to the rules of your employment contract. And so you're performing like the actual functions that you're actually getting paid for. And so if the case is that, we can do just that, get the same amount of money, why does it make sense to go over and above and or beyond, right? And if we're able to actually, make sure that all of the terms in our employment contract are conducive to the wages that we're going to be getting and to the salary that we can be getting, then again, that gives us more power. So I really do see quiet quitting more so as like a form of protest that benefits, I guess, like every single member of Gen Z that's in working society. Because again, it really also identifies, okay, where are there gaps in a workplace where people need to be filling in those gaps, or where managers need to be filling in those gaps? And then how do we pay people to do that work again? And then like the people who are still there, should they be getting paid more for the work that they're doing? Are they doing over like and above what they should be doing? And when they stop doing that, how is that impacting our organization? And okay, is this time to give them a promotion? So I like what I just heard. I don't like the new term though.
Linda, Natty called quiet quitting a form of protest. And I think in previous generations, there were people who didn't do, maybe they were kind of like slackers. But I don't know if those generations would go on TikTok or Instagram and then declare it, right? Even if it is a form of protest, we would just maybe clock out earlier than we're supposed to, right? Not that I ever did that. I'm just saying people have, right? But Linda, do you think that quiet quitters might get quiet fired?
I absolutely do, and particularly if the economy goes down. I mean, some of this discussion is really interesting, but I don't know that it's economically feasible to do all the things that people would like to do and have this balance and decide when they're working and not working. I absolutely do think we should be looking at different kinds of work, remote work and gigs and contracts and everything else. But at the end of the day, people have to work a lot of hours to pay bills, particularly in the atmosphere we have right now. And it's the people who go above and beyond, not necessarily putting in a lot of hours, but certainly giving themselves to the job, being creative, trying to go a bit further, coming up with ideas, everyone else who are going to do better. And if there's a downturn, the people who are quietly quitting, however they define it, are not going to be the ones who stay the longest. And I just want to say, I don't think any generation has the corner on being victimized. Honestly, I think there have been tough times for all of them. There have been some pretty brutal recessions. If you think of the recession in the 80s and the 90s, the unemployment rate went up to double digits, high double digits in some cases. It is not doing that this time, and Gen Zs are not being hit the same way. So I think you got to keep that in mind.
Would you counter? Let me counter this right now. Most Gen Zs are probably never going to be able to own a home. For other generations, they didn't have that challenge, did they?
Well, that's a really broad statement. First of all, you are making some assumptions, but if you're talking about in major cities, it was already really difficult, say, for somebody to live in New York, that was a world-class city, or London. They were moving way far out, and I think you'll see people making different choices. But at least now you can have the option of living somewhere else and working.
I don't know if those are assumptions because I'm Gen X, and even though it took me a very long time to get on the ladder, I was finally able to buy when I was in my 40s, but somebody in their 20s, like I have a few years ahead of them, and I get to decide where I live. I can live in Toronto, but for a lot of people in Gen Z, they might not be able to do that.
You know what? I don't disagree. It's much more difficult, but also let's remember there will be a transfer of wealth from boomers, maybe boomer grandparents to Gen Zs. Won't benefit everybody, but we'll see some of that in the years ahead. Also, people will not necessarily live in major cities as much. They'll be able to work from different places, so they'll go further out. It's not perfect, but it's not maybe quite as dire as it could be.
Well, Rob, I want to come to you because you mentioned the Stress Test podcast that you do and how when you do housing episodes, people really tune into them. How much of an impact is it on Gen Z to know that, maybe there is a chance for them to have homes, but maybe for this to be weighing on them and the jobs that they decide to do and how long they decide to stay in those jobs? Is there a kind of like an immediacy for them to acquire more much faster to be able to do that?
We have to remember Gen Z are pretty young, and I know they're motivated to own homes, but they haven't really moved into the phase of life where I think you really need to be actively trying to get into the housing market. So I think they have time. I notice a disconnect between these generalized feelings. Oh, I really, of course, want to own a house. My parents owned one. They made a lot of money. I'd like to do that too. And the feeling that I've got to get in right now and I better get a job that helps me do that. I think they're taking time to figure things out. And I think that's great. You, as tough as it is to afford a house, I think we all have time. We got to remember that Gen Zs will probably be working till their middle to later 60s or 70 because of longer lifespans and different ways of living, and that gives them a chance to buy houses later.
Scott, let me come to you. Talk numbers. Do we see quiet quitting reflected in the data, or has it been exaggerated?
My sense is it's been exaggerated, but again, it's tricky because a lot of the media coverage are on using sort of selective small samples from places like Indeed or LinkedIn.
Indeed.com?
Yeah, and so what you need, I think, are more like nationally representative or representative of the workforce samples, and so that's what we've been trying to track. And again, I see, look, I mean, anger and anxiety sells, and I think if you phrase that in a way in your stories about the way we're approaching work, you're going to get more attention. But my sense is on some things, over the course of since 2018, say up to 2022, there hasn't been a big shift on some of the key indicators like perceptions of autonomy, perceptions of voice in the workplace, perceptions about work-life culture, being supportive or not. I would say there's a slight tick up for the younger group, say so under 25, under 30, but it's not as dramatic as some of the portraits have been. And I think your point about social media is a good one, right? Because I heard something where somebody posted, they were celebrating the fact that they quit, and they're like, I quit and I'm gonna sit on my porch. And apparently it got 400,000 likes or retweets or whatever. And I laughed because I was like, I couldn't help thinking, but somebody has to build that porch and maintain it. Somebody has to do the work to get your tweet up. And again, if you think about even when you go to a class, you don't want your teacher to be. I think quiet quitting has an undertone to it, which is it's not just necessarily working to rule. It's kind of like you're very close to saying, take this job and shove it. And I think that's a problem. I think that's a danger because of my research showing how important work is as a source of identity and an anchor. And that's particularly crucial. I think back to when I was 22. I think with institutions kind of fading away in a lot of ways, work is the one institution that needs to endure. So I'm concerned about the anti-work narrative and what it does to motivation and what it does to kind of, horrible bosses, awful, that's not excusing exploitation, but I think when it's overgeneralized, it masks the problems like the pay is too low or the staff shortages are an issue.
And Linda, just moving, building on what Scott said, beyond identity, I think we all need workforce stability. Inflation is going up. We're heading into a recession, and people are thinking about how they're going to make ends meet. Will a recession make Gen Z workers more committed to their work, do you think, Linda?
I'm not sure how much the unemployment rate will go up, maybe 1 percentage point, 1.5. I'm not sure it's going to be enough to change attitudes. So that's part of it. I think what will really change as they get older. And I am not dismissing the real concerns younger workers have, but it tends to be that as you have kids, as you have a mortgage, as you have more responsibilities, you change your attitudes a little bit. And I think we'll see some of that. But the next generation may challenge them. That'd be Gen Alpha. Let's see what they want.
Well, it's so interesting because I don't know if you heard that Beyonce had a new song, and one of the lyrics was "Quit your job, I'm gonna quit my job," and then people were quitting their jobs, and she's like, "No, you can't quit your job. It's just a song."
Now what?
Now what, right? Like, how do you pay for your internet, right? To watch Beyonce.
There's new research that's showing that a lot of the people that quit, that a lot of them regret it. So it's kind of like they get swept up in sort of it's cool to quit, but there's still the reality of like you need to work unless you're rich or parents are rich.
Yeah, or Bank of Mom and Dad, right?
Yeah.
Nati, do you think that this attitude shift is being driven by changing values, or does Gen Z, are you experiencing a vastly different labor market than your parents did or your grandparents?
I think we're experiencing a vastly different labor market than our parents or our grandparents. again, like I'm talking about the transformations of technology. We also just like have the extension of work from what was like a very clean cut. Okay, you're working in this realm of production and you're producing something for somebody who's going to make money off of it, into this place like the social aspects of life, right? Like this place where we're now trying to reproduce our capacity to even go back into that realm of production. It's called like the realm of social reproduction. And so like an example of this is like previously, you have like a MySpace generation, I'll say like millennials for like the sake of sakes, where you developers are the only ones who are making money. And with Gen Z, you now have like an influencer generation where developers, they get the largest piece of the pie, of course, but now you have users who are able to monetize certain aspects of the platform that they created, and they're able to make some money. And so when you see like, okay, this is the kind of relationship that I can have with my workplace, you also realize, okay, I don't have to work a 9 to 5, the standard 9 to 5, or the non-standard, 5 to 2. I don't need to be in those spaces. I can just be creative. I can bring something unique to society. I can market it. I can really try to do something that resonates with people, and that will help me command an income that I need to live. And I'm not saying it's necessarily like a living wage, but enough and pools of income that you can have to live. And again, most Gen Z folks, we're not getting paid a living wage because these are entry level jobs. I'm 25. I'm at the oldest tip of the Gen Z pool, where there's skills qualification issues, whatever it might be. And the most accessible or available work is this non-standard or increasingly precarious work in the gig economy, in the hustle economy, in like the pleasure economy. So the reality is we're just going to do whatever we can to live, or potentially get more than we need to live, even if that means not getting a job, but just commanding income through these different avenues.
Well,
And in some cases, you can do that before you're legally of age, so you can work, which is again another benefit.
well, what about dress codes? Because I recently read an article where a young woman wanted to wear her club wear to the office. Do you think that there should be a compromise in how Gen Z behaves in the workplace?
I think that the normative relationship that we have, like with, for example, our dress codes, are part of like a really potentially like antiquated realm of thought that is associated with work, right? Like if I'm able to produce, if I'm in a results oriented workplace and I'm able to produce the results that my boss needs to see, why does it matter?
Okay, I remember
Right?
the
And
things
if
that I
I'm
used to wear in the club. I'm just gonna like count. I remember the things that I used to wear in the club, and thankfully YouTube
yeah,
was not around.
yeah.
And those things would not be appropriate to wear to work. Do you think that there's a line that shouldn't be crossed?
I think there could be a line that should be crossed. Like I'm not the one to define this, but I also think we really live in a society where like this notion of like quote unquote like sex sells is like ultimately so much more real. Like think about things like OnlyFans. There are people who are, that is their sole source of income, and they are making significantly more than the living wage, right? And so if that's the fact, like if I go to the office and me going to the office shirtless helps me get more clients and helps your end bottom line for a business, what is the issue, right? If it actually creates problems, though, that is an issue. Address it and set those standards in your workplace, because you know that that's the issue. And so like it shouldn't be like a universal, okay, this is what is expected. And I think that's what Gen Z is asking. Is like no universal, okay, one logic fits all, one 9 to 5 should be for everything, or if you can't do that, work in like short-term contract. It needs to be unique, and it needs to work, and it needs to generate money. And if we're able to bring that uniqueness and like as an individual, I can do that. Give me more money, and I will be happy to stay there.
Linda, I'm going to give you the last 30 seconds. We know that there's lots of things in the workplace that maybe should change, that are antiquated, like Nati said. But how should organizations address the fact that some younger workers aren't as engaged as they could be?
I think this is really a watershed moment. We went through the pandemic. People are questioning everything, younger workers particularly, but really everyone. So I think everything should be on the table. Everything should be discussed, and this is the time to give everyone a sense of purpose. Remind them why they're there, remind them why they should work for you, and hopefully get better results, particularly with Gen Z, who could give a whole lot if you can engage them.
Thank you so much, everybody. Really enjoyed this conversation and lots of great insights. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Glad to do it.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.